Welcome back to the Fantasy Formula, and today we're going to share our strategy guide for the second half of the F1 fantasy season. Terry, I want to start with you first because you're the first place team out of the three of us. How are you feeling about your team so far, and what's going to be the key for you to survive in the second half?
I'm actually looking forward to developing the strategy for the second half rather than winging it week by week. So yeah, no, all jokes aside, it's actually been quite good fun for the first half, and it's quite nice to be in contention rather than just writing the year off and being at the bottom and thinking what am I going to do for the second half. But yeah, I'm quite excited to see what this half brings. Finished off on a bit of frustration, but there we go. That's the nature of the game, isn't it? Currently.
But top 3,000 in the global league, despite all the ups and downs of this season, you have a lot to be proud of. Really fantastic team. Now, Zach, you've been one of the pioneers of the budget building strategy, and you're in the lead of this race toward that four tier A lineup. How do you feel you're positioned looking ahead to Zandvoort?
I'm very, very excited about it because it does feel like a complete new season for me, F1 fantasy wise. We'll get into it, but budget building has been my mojo for the first part. Now it's not. We're getting into the point where I'm going to be focusing on points. I'm going to be really pushing everyone above me, and I'm gunning for top 1,000. Hopefully, we'll see if we can do it, but it's looking good for now.
So, Zach, this first topic is right up your alley because we're going to step through those four tier A lineups and see which budget ranges are in the mix for some of these teams as we look ahead to the second half. There's only 10 races left. Where should we be focusing to get into these bigger lineups versus when we should just focus on scoring the most points possible? So a lot of teams are here at 109.5 million with McLaren, Ferrari, and Oscar Piastri, but then there's a big jump to the next level up at 120.3 million, where you bring in McLaren, Ferrari, Piastri, and Antonelli. For those teams that are in the middle, in the 110 to 120 million range, how should they approach the second half?
Well, it's a little bit weird, especially going into Zandvoort at least, because it's another basically full reset for the B tier drivers as well, because you've got the likes of Bortoleto, Lawson, Sainz, all of these drivers who look like the top dogs coming into Zandvoort, who are really, really cheap. So you're going to be seeing a lot of teams heading into the second half actually probably with a lot of budget to their names, because you're going to have teams that can need about 109.5 million, but people with like 116 million will have to be using them because there's no way to go up. So you sort of have to just have that budget, but that could work out in your favor, because then when you build up that budget again, you could help you to not have to use a wild card or any extra minus 10s along the way. But just keep an eye on it, because I think for the first few races, we're going to be seeing teams with a lot of just value in their team just left on the subs.
It's a great point. I think if you're in the one teens, you're in this no man's land where if you aggressively save for 5 or 6 more races, you might not be able to reach this Piastri Antonelli lineup. So maybe there are some alternatives where you could take advantage of either that extra budget or start looking at differentials just to see if you can make up those points through some creative ways too. Now, Terry, this is where you and I come into the mix because we can't quite afford the next level of lineup that we'll show in just a minute, but we could afford either McLaren, Ferrari, Piastri, Antonelli, or McLaren, Mercedes, Piastri, Russell. Do either of these teams tempt you looking ahead to Zandvoort, or is it a little too early to invest in Mercedes?
I think the George one probably interests me more. So I'm still unsure about Kimi's second half performance and that up and down that we've talked about in terms of the season he's had. So if anything, I would be leaning towards bringing George in. But again, the Mercedes performance hasn't been spectacular over the last few weeks. Yeah, we saw just before the summer break, Toto talking about they rolled back the suspension again. They've done some work where wind tunnel correlation. I mean, we feel like 4 years we've been hearing that conversation now from Mercedes, doesn't it? So I think for me, there's still some danger over what Mercedes is going to do. We know teams are switching development off. So is it a case of we're going to get a very stagnated field in terms of teams going forward for the second half as all of the focus now turns to 2026, bar some track-specific upgrades? No one's bringing any major developments forward unless it's got a link to 2026 in terms of being on the track and doing almost like a testing ground on it. So I think for me, there's still a big question mark over Mercedes' performance, which then puts a question mark over the builds with obviously Kim and George in it as well.
Now, Zach, I'm sure there's a lot of intrigue for you to step into a lineup like this. You have George Russell averaging 12.3 points per race more than Nico Hulkenberg, who's the most likely number 2 driver on the rest of our teams. Is this the level where you want to start getting into the 4 Tier A lineups, or are you looking to go even higher?
It's really, really hard, and it all depends on that Mercedes pace, because I'm actually coming into Zandvoort really, really hoping that Mercedes are fast, because it'd make my life a whole lot easier, because then actually I could still go for the big, big points, and I wouldn't have to worry about budget, because I could still afford to have the likes of Alonso in my team, who looks dead set. Well, not dead set, you might get a DNF, but set more than a lot of other people to get that 0.6 million. And then maybe it's me being a little bit greedy on those things, but I'm still looking at that occasionally to see what happens. But yeah, 100%. Mercedes pace, if it's not great, I'll have to be starting to look at points and then looking over to Ferrari.
And speaking of Ferrari, this next team is 126.8 million. That's McLaren, Ferrari, Piastri, Russell. And I think this is where that extra cost cap is really going to shine. You've got Ferrari, who have scored a bit more than Mercedes over the last few races. They still have some of the fastest pit stops, but then you also have the better of the two Mercedes drivers in George Russell. So this is an area where I think a lot of us are going to try to get our teams for the last few races of the year. I still have an axe to grind with Pierre Gasly over this, because I could afford this team if it wasn't for those 2 races where Pierre Gasly was on for 0.6 million gain. I ran him. He DNF'd. He lost 0.6 million. That's a $1.2 million swing, and that happened to me twice. So I do blame him for this, but I'll stay patient, and hopefully with another race or 2, I can be here as well. Zach, are you able to reach 126.8 yet, and you have the choice between these 2 teams, or are you still budget building too?
I have the budget for the lot. That's the exciting thing. But it still comes down to where I want to put everything in my team, because it's all fun and games going right down to Bortoleto, Lawson, Sainz in these teams, because they would be good and they look fine on points. They look good on budget. But then you've got to be careful, because I remember this happened in 2024 where I swapped over too early to these teams and I got stuck with the double Sauber pairing. And I kind of got in a rut with my team, and I just about stayed in the top 1,000. So this year, I've got to be careful. If I do go to these 4.5 million assets, maybe have an extra 1, 2, 3 million in the bank, just in case something drastic happens and we need to upgrade those B tier drivers. So I'll be looking at that. And maybe that's why 126.8 will be the sort of team I'll be looking at, because that gives me a little bit more range. But also, because Russell right now, even when Mercedes haven't been performing, it's normally Antonelli dropping the points, and Russell's still in the mixed. So I'm quite happy to keep Russell there.
And I think back to when we had the number 1 player in the world last year, Andrew. He was telling us that his key to keeping with the best teams was making sure he could afford not only the next level up of the lineup, but not having all price floor drivers underneath, because they have that higher DNF risk, and it could outweigh some of the benefits of having the better drivers in. So I'm trying to strike that balance myself of how do you jump into the 4 Tier A lineups, but not so soon that you're running 3, $4.5 million drivers and bringing more risk onto the bottom of your team. Now, the last lineup, of course, is for those big wallets: McLaren, Ferrari, Piastri, Leclerc. It's 128.3 million. I think this lineup is going to be huge for a race like Monza, where Ferrari always tends to do a bit better. Leclerc, a previous race winner here. I think there are some teams that had been specifically saving up for the second half. There are even some of these teams that have been tanking in the first half just to build their cost cap for the second half of the season and can afford this. So to me, entering Zandvoort, this team has a clear advantage over everybody else.
Yeah, I really do like it, but it's just I'm not blown away by Leclerc, because of just he can get quite unlucky, which is a big issue. Well, I call it unlucky, you call it Ferrari doing Ferrari things. I don't know, but that's also to play with all of that. I'd really like to get to a position where if you can look at that team without one price floor driver, I think you can be happy.
Now, before we move on, I want to ask the question that's probably on everybody's mind. At what point do you stop chasing all of these cost cap gainers, assume that this is the team that you're going to make the final stretch with, and then just focus on scoring the most points possible? There's surely got to be an inflection point where even if you get the next level up of the team, you only have a week or 2 to get the benefit of it, and it's probably not worth it anymore. Is there a race in your mind, Zach, that you're targeting to just stop gaining budget and just focus on the team that you have?
It will be Kota. It will be, because basically I'm in a very lucky position where I can go all out on the points with the 4A builds and still get decent budget increases from the likes of Bortoleto, Lawson, potentially Alonso, depends on what team I do go for. And the whole gist of it is I will be messing about with the B tier drivers until Kota, because by that point I will, if everything goes well, be able to afford Piastri, Norris, McLaren, Mercedes minimum. And I think at that point, that means I can use the extra DRS the way I want to, which is perfect. And also, I think at that point, I can scrap off everything else and be like, cool, this budget's great. I can move around to Piastri, Verstappen, McLaren, Ferrari, Piastri, Norris, McLaren, Mercedes. You can move around a lot. And I think at that point as well, there's not many races left to go. You've kind of just got to sack off budget if it's not working for you. But that also comes back to, where do you stop now if you don't have that budget? Because I've got a lot of budget, but I would say if you're struggling on the budget around 110, 115 million, maybe it is, like you said, time to go for those differentials, because the budget's not going to happen in time for it to actually help you in any way. And then also at the same time, maybe you're just getting to the 122.2 million teams, and maybe you're like, okay, but I can't really get that any better in time. Maybe you go, okay, I'll stick with these and try some differential B tier drivers there. So it depends where you are. But I would say if it looks like you can't get to Piastri, Norris, McLaren, Mercedes by Kota time, yeah, I would say points 100% right now.
Terry, I want to move over to you. Is there a particular race you're eyeing to just focus on your team and the points rather than building cost cap? Or are you just going with the flow?
I think I'm just going with flow. I've done that quite a bit this year anyway. I don't think I've gone all out budget building. I think I've tried to find a balance between picking up points and also making sure that I'm getting good budget along the way. So I don't think I've been, I'd say that Zach's probably focused a bit more on getting that possum and in that budget building. I think I've definitely tried to balance the both, which kind of goes with the way I play the game and have done in the past. People know I'm not a fan of picking drivers just for budget. I like to pick points. That's my style. I kind of find it difficult to just budget build sometimes. So I think I've had a mixture of two, but I think you're right. There comes a point when you've got to switch, otherwise it's pointless, isn't it? Because yeah, you've got to have some fun in the game. You've got to do that. We've got most likely second chance leads in terms of, after summer break we normally get things like that. So actually, is there going to come a point where I'll just go all out and go, let's just get some points on the board? Because also, I feel the position I'm in, even though I may be a bit down on budget, league position, if I can get some good points and maybe even a sway somewhere with someone different, that could boost the ranking right up. Because I saw the effect that, just Behrman in the DNF had the other way. That actually, if you make a call back the other way, you'll jump straight up the league quite fast, I think, as well. So I think that's a big factor as well.
That balances work quite well for you, Terry. And you're totally right. The league is so tight this year that one good move one way or another could really bring your ranking a lot. So just staying the course and not having any huge shifts one way or another could just incrementally march you up to the top of the league. So great call there. For me, my first thought was maybe waiting as late as Mexico. That's just one race later than what Zach had mentioned with Coda. I think it depends on how my team is structured coming out of that sprint race at Circuit of the Americas. Mexico is a high overtake track, so I thought maybe I'd have one last push for budget gain with some of those high overtake drivers. But it's definitely a make or break moment with 5 or 6 races left of the season. I need to start committing to points soon. So I would say no later than Mexico for me. So if you're on the FanAmp YouTube page today, you might notice that we've launched memberships, where now you have extra access to emojis. We're going to be launching videos a little bit sooner for some of our members, and you're going to have special access that nobody else has. So if you want to support the channel, help us keep making great content for you, make sure you join the membership and look out for that great content today. Now, Zach, a little while ago, you had mentioned that if you're in that $110 to $115 million budget range, you're going to have to start thinking creatively to try to make up some of those points. So I want to walk through some of those alternatives that could get those teams back in the fight. I think the title fight between Norris and Piastri could be that first differential for our DRS boosted driver, because we have Piastri that costs $5 million less, and he's the championship leader, but Norris has won 3 of the last 4 races and is now the highest scoring driver in F1 fantasy. Do you see Norris as someone that you could invest a little bit of extra cost cap into to score some differential points if Norris can keep this momentum?
100%, but yeah, it has to be for if you kind of are just sacking off the budget building in essence, just because you're going to really struggle to build any Norris teams. So Yes, because he does look good, and especially around Zandvoort, he was brilliant there last year. I expect him to do well again in 2025. We've got Singapore coming up soon. He was good there as well. We've got a lot of good Norris tracks coming up, so keep an eye on him. But I would say 100%, it's for one of those teams that you just can't budget build enough anymore. So you've got to look at the differentials, because you're going to still be seeing people, even with the 4A teams or budget building, going straight away. Piastri is the guy. No other person can get close. And then if you go, well, hang on a second, I'll switch over to Norris for that. If it all goes right, and we haven't actually had a weekend like this for a while, but if it all goes right with Norris P1 fastest lap and driver of the day, that's potentially around a 20-point swing. At 2 times DRS, 40 points. So definitely keep an eye on those sorts of differentials, because it could very much make or break your season.
Terry, I want to ask you a question that has been out there all season, is if McLaren has to pick a favorite, someone to get the preferential tire strategy, someone to get the team orders advantage, do you think they're leaning one way or another between Lando and Oscar, or is it really whoever's better in the moment gets the advantage?
I think it's whoever's better, but I think Baku is, for me, the turning point. So Baku is the earliest that McLaren can wrap up the Constructors' Championship. I think when the Constructors is in the bag, then it's each driver for themselves. And I think that's, if you listen to Zach Brown, the way he's talking, and Andrea said it when they were talking, it feels like that's what they want. We know that's what pays the team bonus. We know that's the overriding factor when a team starts is secure the Constructors and then go for the championship. So for me, I'm looking at that as maybe that's going to be the turning point where we might see this hugely anticipated gloves off, 2 drivers going at it, papaya rules all almost going by the trackside, because that's secure then, and everyone knows then they've got it. Everyone knows that it doesn't matter if there's a crash or coming together, because that Constructors' Championship is in the bag and done. And it kind of feels that's what McLaren have done, where they've gone, wrap that one up first, and then you can go head to head. That's certainly the impression I'm getting from it. So I think that is going to be the turning point for the season. Once that Constructors' Championship's tighter, I think it's going to be go for it. And then I think it'll be whichever drives in the lead, that side of things. But then we did see with, obviously what happened with Lando in the one stop. They're not afraid to make a different call, which is something I think last year they probably wouldn't have done. I think they would have just boxed him on the basis of you're doing the same as the other car. So I think that they are playing with that strategy a bit. They are sort of willing to do that. And that's going to play in Oscar's mind, because if there's an opportunity to roll reverse that now, you haven't got the argument then to come back on that we want you to have the same strategy, because they've played that card now. So if you're Oscar's side of the pits now, you're going, actually, if we've got an opportunity to do something different on strategy, we can do it, because we've already done it as a team. So you kind of lose that focus of, we're not going to do it. We're going to keep drivers fair. And on that side, there's an opportunity to maybe change things about a bit if a race isn't going your way. So I think that is going to play a huge factor. And Oscar, he doesn't like, we've seen this in the past. They don't like it when it's leaning towards a favouritism one driver. McLaren like to talk about this. We've got 2 number 1 drivers. They're very big on this. So if there's an inkling, I think that, they can even the cards up a bit. They'll take it, just if anything, to keep this public image of we've got 2 number 1 drivers.
In putting your 2 points together, it sounds like there is no clear leader heading into the last 10 races. It might be that if you're behind and you need that differential, you might want to pick your spots where you think Lando might have the edge over Piastri. Hope for something like in Australia, where you get a few extra points from Lando in a way that's really meaningful over Oscar. And like Zach said, there are certain circuits like Zandvoort where Norris has been historically pretty strong, so maybe those are where you pick your spots. But I don't think there's going to be one driver that's consistently better than the other throughout the rest of the season. So for me, sticking with Piastri because he's cheaper makes more sense. But if you're desperate for those points, the occasional Norris 2x boost will be worth it for you.
One thing to keep an eye on as well, just heading into when it does get spicy, let's say they do wrap it up around Baku or even earlier, because we have seen them get close to having collided together, and they have collided together. If there's ever like a race where it looks like McLaren are going to be dominant, they look quite close in practice sessions. It's going to be 1-2 with them close, and it is getting to that make or break point in the season for both of them. That's also where, let's say you're 7,000th in the world, you've got 112 million. You don't really have the budget to play to get into the top 1,000. You're not in a high enough rank. That's also where you could look at, now this is desperate calls, but looking at the differential of not even picking a McLaren driver if you think they are going to collide. Because no doubt in my mind, there will probably be a race where they both damage each other's race and someone probably does pick up the pieces. Obviously, it's pure guesswork whenever that would happen, but keep an eye on stuff like that as well.
Yeah, and we've also got some tracks as well, which might throw up a few surprises as well in the second half. There's Las Vegas, cooler temperatures, Mercedes. There's obviously, we've already talked about Ferrari want to win Monza, Singapore first corner. If something there goes wrong, invariably something can happen there. So I do think the second half has got some elements of Brazil and the weather. So there is some tracks I think coming up still over the course of the season where actually there might be something different in there in terms of a different team breaking up that McLaren 1-2, if nothing else. So this dominance we've seen might not last for the whole of the second half. We might not be talking a Red Bull 1-2 style all the way through the season with just one race coming in. We might actually be seeing a difference in some of the teams coming back in, because actually that midfield is so close still. You take the top two out sometimes, you can go all the way to 6th, 7th with couple of seconds, if that, separated them all.
And Terry, that's a really great segue into the next big disruptor to the medal lineup for these teams that are trying to make up points in the second half. Mercedes could be those assets that get us that differential. I have Kimi Antonelli on the screen here because he has been a wild card this year. He's got 4 DNFs, so he's had a stretch where it's been pretty rough for him. But in the 10 races that he has finished, he scored double-digit fantasy points in 9 of those 10 races. He also has 5 20-plus point fantasy scores, so when he's on, he's really on, and he could be a differential to those Piastri Russell teams that more of us can afford. So that's one guy that could get us back in the race. And also, too, like you said, there are certain tracks where Mercedes could thrive compared to Ferrari or even McLaren based on some recent history there. George Russell, recent race winner in Brazil, 1-2 for Mercedes in Vegas last season. So there are some times where Mercedes makes sense as a spot start. That could be another way for us to try to jump back into the mix with teams like Zach that have so much more budget than us. So sticking with the theme of the 4 Tier A asset lineups, in order to afford them, you're probably going to need to have some budget floor drivers. And Lawson and Bortoleto enter Zandvoort as prime candidates to round out those teams. Over the last 2 races, Lawson scored a combined 19 points, Bortoleto 31 points. And so to gain 0.6 million, they both need negative scores. Bortoleto, -14, Lawson, -2. And so I think you're going to see a lot of teams able to afford it, which is good for those higher budget teams like Zach, that they can run even better lineups. But for those of us that are chasing, we do have these assets that are really likely to gain 0.6 million each and then start approaching them. So I think these are going to be 2 of the most popular B tier drivers in the game. Zach, let me ask you something. If you are close to a 4 Tier A lineup, but you need to run all 3 $4.5 million drivers, is Colapinto worth the risk, or should you build budget a little bit more?
It's a really, really difficult decision on this one because I just don't like Colapinto as an asset. And I was really grinning my teeth when I thought I'd have to be using him when Bortoleto was getting driver of the day, because I really thought he was going to go up budget instead of going down to 4.5. But luckily, he just stayed below that threshold. It's just Colapinto. We've been talking about how important points are now. I would say it's not worth it if you need any sort of team with Colapinto in it. He's got -2 and -4 in the last 2 races. It's just not really working out for him in Alpine, and let alone when he gets negative points, he's a bit crash heavy as well. So I think Lawson and Bortoleto, I'm happy to keep. Both of them have been in actually decent form, F1 and F1 fantasy wise. But Colapinto, he's a no-go for me.
And Terry, a great point made by Zach here is that Colapinto's had a hard time keeping it on the track. And this time last season, we're coming up on some circuits where he really struggled, particularly with crashes. I remember you and I were in person in Las Vegas watching the corpse of a Williams car getting wheeled past us. Does it feel like Colapinto is a driver we want to just leave alone and see if he works it out himself and focus on these 2 drivers? Or do you think Franco is worth a risk as Alpine tries to salvage some points this season?
I think there's 2 ways. There's 2 ways to look at this. One, Franco needs a big performance for the second half of the season because that Alpine seat is one which is we kind of don't know what's going on with it, to be honest. We saw the announcement earlier that Franco was going to be in it for like 5 races, which Flavio then turned around and said, no, that's not the case. We've got past these 5 races. We're at the summer break. Obviously, there was the incident with the Pirelli tyre crash as well in Hungary. There was some speculation they were going to change things. It looks like they're not. It looks like they're going to keep it going. On the flip side, we are coming to tracks where actually Franco does know. And these are tracks where he, bear in mind, he started his Williams journey this time last year. So actually, they are going to be familiar tracks, which potentially is a advantage over some of the rookies that are on the grid for this year. So if the car's delivering in a way that actually could get some performance, and then you've got that added, I suppose, incentive is probably the best way to describe it, of knowing that you've got to perform to keep your drive for next year, will all of that play into his hands to say, actually, I'm gonna show them that I'm worthy of that seat for next year. We know they've got Mercedes engine coming in. It's actually a big name seat to be playing for next year. So that pressure can go either way, can't it? There's no way of knowing. It might actually be just the sort of shot in the arm he needs to, take that performance to an 11 and start getting some points on familiar tracks. But that Alpine just hasn't looked like it's a car that's going to challenge in the same way as what the Sauber has. We know that the V-Carb's got a much better car. So when you add it into the mix as a team, in terms of what's ready on the grid, like Haas and the improvements they made, then I don't think Alpine have brought enough to make that car jump up either, which then relies around, do you just bring him in the hope that he keeps on the track and just gets round to allow you to build other ways? I don't think we're going to get a spectacular points from him. But I think in fancy terms, if he could get some finishes and secure that budget building in that sense, that might help a lot of drivers running. But I would still probably wait a couple of races to see what sort of Alpine we're getting after the break, to be honest.
I think with Franco, it might just take a little bit of luck the weeks that you play him. For those of us in Hungary that had Liam Lawson over Ollie Behrman, we got a little bit of that luck. The driver on paper ended up DNFing. The driver that was supposed to not do as well ended up surviving the race and was the better asset. That might be the best time for Colapinto. If you can just find that race where he finds a little bit of magic, and then the consensus meta driver that's at that same price range has a difficult race, maybe that's how you gain some points back too. Now it's time for our grand finale, and we're going to go through the best chips for the last 10 races of the season. I'll tell you a few that stick out to me right away. I like Limitless from Monza. This is a bottom 50% circuit for overtakes each of the last 2 seasons. Only one DNF in 2024. So even though it's the temple of speed, you have a lot of DRS trains, and I think those top drivers are going to perform better and be that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 finisher. So I like Monza even better than the first race coming out of the break of Zandvoort for the Limitless chip. Zach, what stands out to you the most for the last 10 races?
I think it's looking at, and straight away, wild cards. Yeah, we're getting to that point of the season where unless you're going for the budget building, you're just not there each week, and then you're like, okay, I need to use it. But I completely agree with, it gets to a point with wildcard where if you're using it in Brazil, you're not really getting the benefits to whatever team you're swapping over to. So you kind of got to get the wild card done. Limitless as well, 100%. We spout on about this. Well, I say I spout on about it most of the time. A lot about how you just need to get it done, because with people using these 4A builds, people are scoring more points than they did at the start of the season. Limitless is becoming less and less important of a chip. And then I've got to say, it's got to be the sprint race weekends. The first one coming up, Kota, like I mentioned, I really do like that for extra DRS. Hopefully this time round, because last year we had a bit of a Ferrari upset, and that made things a little bit crazy, and I moved it to Brazil. Did not work out. But love the free times for Kota. If you can afford to get to minimum Piastri, Leclerc, if you can go to Piastri Norris, or looks like potentially you go Piastri Norris, that's where Qatar comes into play quite nicely. And I also 100% agree with no negative in Brazil. That is 100% the next best time to use a no negative. We saw exactly what it can be like last year. Do not risk it. If there's any chance of rain at Brazil, put it in straight away.
Wish we could get a mulligan on my no negative, which as we all know is used in a wet sprint weekend as Spa, and it was the exact opposite of what we've always seen here. But Brazil has been so wet the last few years. I think these buffering chips, no negative, autopilot, they're going to be so important. And just to put a finer point on autopilot in Brazil, the number 2 and 3 drivers last season were Ocon and Gasly for fantasy scoring. Alonso broke the top 3 at Brazil in 2023 because the rain could do a whole lot of uncertainty to the grid, and particularly for fantasy scoring as well. Terry, let me ask you, for those of us that are still holding on to our 3X boost, I agree with Zach that it should be done on a sprint weekend. Probably avoid it at Brazil because it could be wet. But if you're in between Coda and Qatar, do you have a favorite for that?
Um, I've actually thought about doing both. I thought about waiting for Qatar because then you've got that, you've got a bigger budget potentially as well, going back to what Zach said. So I think a lot of it does depend on that. Who is your second driver? I think ultimately that's going to play a part as well. So I wouldn't be, if you're just short of budget coming into Kota, I wouldn't be against waiting until Qatar to use the maximum effect, knowing by then you should have enough of those potentially two McLaren drivers doing that way. I think if I went into Kota and not be able to afford the two McLaren drivers, that would probably make me nervous about using it in terms of where I use it. So I'd probably hold it there. And like I say, Brazil just doesn't feel comfortable in any way to be using it. So I think with the advantage around that sprint race, and it could also make for a really interesting setup to the final race as well. Yeah, if you need to make some points quick and you've got that big budget and you haven't used it, it might just sway something in your favour going right into the last race.
Now, I know Final Fix is a hard chip to prepare for, but I want to give you a few examples of things to look out for. Going back to Monza, remember, it's a low overtake circuit. And so if you have your 2X boosted driver qualify low, you may want to remove them for the likes of Charles Leclerc, who has a really good history at Monza. If you think back to just last season, Max Verstappen in the championship winning car qualified 7th and finished the race 6th. So it's very hard for these top drivers to overtake, even at a fast circuit like Monza. So that's one that stands out to me. Mexico as well for Final Fix. This is the opposite. It's a top 5 track for overtake. So it could be a rebound opportunity if your driver qualifies low or takes an engine penalty. And then, of course, if Brazil's dry, think back to Verstappen's 16 positions gained after his engine penalty last season. So lots of good opportunities to either avoid drivers that qualify low or to take advantage of drivers that are starting from the back of the grid.
I want to highlight just as well how when you're talking about engine penalties as well, because that is such a key point. Realistically, this season, we haven't really had any quali sessions, which sounds crazy considering we have Antonelli and Hamilton having issues a couple of times, but not big issues from the likes of Piastri, Norris, or even Verstappen. I would have a punt at for Final Fix potentially if he was qualifying low. It just doesn't seem like we're getting any of that unless we get an engine penalty. So 100% for me, it's most likely going to be if I see an engine penalty and it looks like a track that's not impossible to overtake on. So yeah, like you mentioned, probably not Monza if you're going for that technique. No Singapore, the likes of that. But yeah, if it's a track that you can overtake on and an engine penalty, 100% you've got to use it. And then quickly also on autopilot, basically, once you get to those 4A teams, you can start at least keeping an eye on it throughout the race weekends, because even with teams like Piastri and Russell, let's say it's another Canada situation, you might then find yourself in a situation where you have Piastri and Russell and all of a sudden Russell looks good and you could potentially use autopilot there. So just keep an eye on that. Autopilot's another hard one to guess when you're going to use it. A lot of the times you will accidentally just get absolutely nothing out of it. So don't worry too much if that is the case. But yeah, definitely when you get to those 4A teams, it looks very good to be using it.
I'm on 2 years in a row now where my autopilot didn't move the 2X boost, so hopefully I can get some more mojo out of it this year. And just to combine that thought, Zach, with something Terry said earlier, you have races like Las Vegas where if your second driver is a Mercedes driver, they finished 1-2 here last season, maybe that's an opportunity where you find a Mercedes-heavy track or cool weather environment, something where that chip could move. Potentially you get some value out of it that way too. We'll be back with our Zandvoort preview next week. Let us know if you have any questions as you're preparing for these last 10 races in the comments. And until then, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you for Zandvoort.